Okay, are we ready? Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Monday, October 6th work session. Call the meeting to order. Let's start with roll call, please, Cindy.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Ms. Downs?
Here.
Ms. Flynn?
She's just gonna be a few minutes late.
Ms. Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder virtually?
Yes, here virtually.
Ms. Underhill?
Here.
And Mayor Hardy.
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
Let's read in, Dave.
Yes. Mr. Snyder, could you please identify your remote location and reason for participation by electronic means?
Yes, at my home, 116 Great Falls Street. Recovering from oral surgery and radiation treatment. And just very quickly, I want to thank City Council, city staff, and so many members of the community for supporting me during this time. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I move that City Council approve electronic participation by Councilmember Snyder in this meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's adopted policy.
We have a second. Second. Ms. Downs on the second. Call roll, please.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dave, we're glad to
Pass
see
it.
you,
Thank
and
you.
Dave, we're glad to see you, and glad that you're recovering nicely.
Thank
Send
you.
that around the table.
We'll pick these down to Taya, please. Alrighty, we have several items for work session tonight, and we welcome staff as well as members of the Urban Forestry Commission. Thank you for joining us tonight.
So I'll do a quick introduction. As you'll hear tonight from our staff report, the city has been losing tree canopy coverage over the past 20 and 10 years. We don't have sort of comprehensive data on it because we don't currently have the tools to do that. But if you take sort of a commercial site by commercial site look, we think it is reasonable to expect that when we do a comprehensive survey, that we'll see a decrease in canopy coverage in parts of the city. And so that's a problem that we are trying to solve. The state has given us new authorities in recent years, new tools to provide additional regulatory ways to protect tree canopy coverage. So tonight we'll discuss the staff report and some of the analysis behind tree canopy coverage. And the request is to schedule an initiating resolution at your meeting in October 27th to kick off a policy discussion on this topic. I should note that with our commercial areas, we do have new trees that are being planted. And so one of the reasons that if you just measured canopy coverage, we need time for those trees that have been planted to grow up and meet the canopy coverage targets that are ultimately we think we will have, but those trees are young at the present time. And we have lost canopy coverage just because of greater density. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to our team. And Matt, do you want to make any introductory comments before we turn it over to Kurt and to Charles and to Cameron and to members of the Urban Forestry Commission who are here with us tonight?
Sure. I'll be very brief. I think we actually have a pretty interesting presentation, helpful update since March when I think this topic was last discussed. There's a lot of ongoing analysis. Some things I think we're able to answer tonight. Some I think in late November we should be able to, given some of the ongoing research. But I think regardless of where the numbers are, our recommendation is pretty clear as it relates to the commercial areas and how far we can stretch the requirements in the city code. So I think you'll hear a pretty consistent message tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to Charles, our urban forester.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Wyatt. And thank you, Mayor Hardy and members of City Council. I'm excited to share a few slides with you this evening. Tonight, planning staff and I are going to show some of the tree canopy data we've compiled since our last work session in March. And for that, if I could share my screen, Cameron will kick us off.
Nice. And Cameron, you might want that mic real close to your mouth,
okay.
Just make sure the folks at home can hear.
Okay, gotcha. I'm used to the ones upstairs working really good. Fit play. All right, well, before we dive into policies and recommendation, I think it's good to be reminded of why tree canopy is worth preserving and the benefits that it offers. Aside from giving us the air we breathe, trees provide habitat for migrating birds and pollinators. Through biofiltration, the leaves are capturing air pollutants, their roots trap stormwater from runoff. In a warming climate, trees are combating urban heat island effect, cooling both people and buildings, reducing heat-related emergencies, as well as energy usage. The beautification of trees is also an economic stimulant. A Texas A&M Forest Service study compared treed commercial districts to similar areas lacking trees. It was found shoppers in tree districts were willing to stay longer and pay about 10% higher prices, while rental rates for the properties were 7% higher. All of these psychological effects influence us beyond where we choose to shop and live. Biophilic design resonates with us and is proven to be a reducer of stress. Tree-lined streets encourage people to be active, move more, walk, bike, and reducing the risk of obesity and cardiac disease. Now, I know it's been a minute since you've seen this topic, but I'll give a brief timeline on how we got here. During development reviews, the Urban Forestry Commission first became aware of a legislative gap. The requests for tree canopy on projects often were ignored due to the fact that City Code did not require a tree canopy minimum for commercial properties. All this led to a work session with City Council this past March 17th, which addressed an amendment of the Virginia Code, which enabled jurisdictions to permit a 10% canopy minimum for commercial properties. The direction of the council was for staff to report back with deeper research and understanding of the topic. We've gathered a lot of information, but staff continues to assess tree canopy data and to better understand what our own local canopy coverage looks like, impacts on growth and development, as well as other strategies employed by adjacent jurisdictions. I think it's also worth noting that the UFC's cause is supported by City Council's current year strategic priorities to expand green infrastructure, tree canopy, and open space, as well as the Comprehensive Plan Chapter 5's specific strategy goal to incorporate standards and requirements in the city's development regulations, including special exceptions, site plans, subdivision plans, and grading plans to support resilience goals. Takes a minute. So this map here shows a 2014 snapshot of the city's tree canopy. For the purposes of this presentation and our recommendations, we will be not be focusing on the residential zoning, R1A, R1B, but rather the commercial revitalization areas outlined in blue, which account for 23% of the city's land coverage. And before we get into staff recommendations, Kurt will review our current code requirements, as well provide a simplified example of how it operates.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Right, so before diving into policy of stuff we can do, I'd like to talk about what we do at this moment. So we've got 3 drivers up there of how we actually get trees onto commercial properties with our current regulations. So 2 of those are through enforcement of our parking lot regulations. So for interior parking lots, if they exceed a certain amount of square footage, a certain percentage of the parking area has to be dedicated to interior planting. Then as well for perimeter parking lots, where a parking lot is adjacent to a public street or an abutting property, there are tree planting requirements that come into play. Outside of parking, there are also buffer requirements for commercial sites that share a side with one of the other zones listed on the slide, and that will come into play in our diagrams. So rather than go through individual site plans to kind of understand how these come into play, what we did is create some simplified diagrams that might help a larger audience understand this current regulation. Okay. So starting here, we'll take the Harris Teeter site at 301 West Broad Street. And what we did is take the, on the right side, you'll see a grid. It's 10 by 10, and you kind of just imagine the entire site as one big square. And then we're going to go through the current regulations and see how much tree canopy we get, just kind of naturally following what we have in place. So we start with the perimeter parking lot trees. This site has no surface level parking, so you get 0 trees from that requirement. The same is true for the interior parking lot. This site has quite a large buffer on the side of it there. You can see it indicated by that light color that comes into play. And so that actually gets you quite a bit of tree canopy, over 12,000 square feet. Street trees come into play on this one as well, and we get almost 3,000 square feet of tree canopy there. That covers all the trees on the site. So then in total, you end up with about 13% of the site being covered with tree canopy. If we take a look at another diagram, so this one is Madera Falls Church. You can imagine the grid there, surrounded by public streets on 3 sides, with a commercial zone and a residential zone on that 4th side. So running through that same exercise, we can see that the perimeter parking lot, under current regulations, gets us 0 square footage of trees. Same applies for the interior parking lot requirements. And the buffer here only supplied about 1,400 square feet of tree canopy. We do have street trees on this site, which supplied quite a bit more than the buffer. And then there were some other trees in kind of the public plaza on the corner of that site. But with all that accounted for, we still only got to 8% canopy coverage on that whole site. And for a large site like that, that's certainly less trees than the Harris Teeter site, and something we might want to address.
Can I have one question, Kurt?
Sure.
So on the table and in these grids, are the calculations even at 8%, for example? It's like these are projections, right? Like 20 years from now, this is the projection of what the grid will be.
Yes, that's correct. So what we do for measuring tree canopy is take the tree inventory and the planting list from the developer, and then we measure that against our sheet, which I believe is one of our attachments tonight. It's from the Chesapeake Bay 20-year tree canopy worksheet. So we can see what species are getting planted on the site, and then that correlates to a number on this sheet. We total that all up, and that gets our calculations seen here tonight. Okay. Moving right along, I will pass it to Charles for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you, Kurt. As many of us know, there are many challenges to our urban forest. One of them is land development, but there are many others, including invasive pests, which we've just recently seen the newest one come in, minimal root areas for the tree pits, urban heat island effects, along with many others. So we're just hoping to address at least one of these items this evening. So here's kind of a typical special exception example. Here is the site pre-build in 2012, and here is it kind of after. So you can kind of see the building gets pushed out to maximize the square footage of office space. So we're hoping to kind of create a little bit more thoughtful development, especially since we don't have parking lots to help us get our tree canopy. And here's just a minor site plan. So the building didn't change a whole lot. But what we did see is a lot of the mature trees along the perimeter of the property get removed, and you can see how much more light is getting down to that. And that's a recent picture from Google Earth. So that was built a few years ago, and we're still not seeing a whole lot. It takes about 10 to 15 years for a newly planted tree to show up on most tree surveys. So here's kind of the root of the data. This is kind of what we worked off of, and we kind of worked through to find out how to present this data. So the thing I want to focus on is the on-site tree canopy that's excluding the street trees. A lot of the times the street trees are in the city's right-of-way. A lot of projects, the trees were, there were existing street trees that were removed and then replaced. So what I'd like to have as a policy is we only include what's on-site. If you look at our average, my apologies. If we look at our average, we're getting about 11% on-site street trees with our current regulations. And if you look at the 5 properties that are below, most of those are very large developments that went through, not all of them went through the SC process, but some of them did. And so if you bump these numbers up, if you take all the minimums that are below 10%, we get about 12 to 13% average tree canopy on all of these projects. So we wouldn't see a giant increase, but I think as we move forward and the more projects go through without parking lots, that number will drop significantly if we don't make some changes. So here, I'm going back to this map here, because I think it shows, just has good information. 77% of the land area is R1A and R1B, though they're not immune to canopy loss either. So here is an example of how one lot with one house was turned into 4 lots with 4 homes. So this is a pretty extreme example. We don't see a whole lot of this, but staff will continue to kind of monitor what we can do further for these types of properties.
So while we're on residential, I know that we have the strictest requirement already, which is 20% canopy in 10 years for residential, is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty rare that you would have one subdivision that turns into 4. I don't think we have that many split lots anymore, but each one of those would have to achieve 20% in 10 years?
Yes. Any more questions on single family? Okay.
I have a question. So do we, we built a house 10 years ago and is there a check? Like, does someone literally come and take a look? To see
Yes,
if
I review every plan that comes in.
Okay.
And I check the calculations, both kind of what trees are saved for each property.
Okay.
And I make sure the chart that is on each grading plan, and check for accuracy and code compliance. And then before I sign the release of the new landscape bond that's required for every property, I go out
okay.
there and I verify the trees are planted correctly. That's the big one, and make sure they're the right species. So those are really 2 things I'm looking for.
Before final, like, occupancy
Yes.
granted and all that. Okay.
Right,
Great,
correct.
thank you.
But not at 10
Your
years.
question was.
But I guess,
yeah,
like, in 10 years, no one comes out and says, oh, the downs aren't meeting the 20%.
No, not yet.
I'm not saying, it's not any kind of criticism.
Oh,
I
no,
was just
of course.
curious, yeah.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that yet, but we would like to.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, of course. All right. So in conclusion, staff recommends to proceed with the state-allowed minimums to close the gap in our tree canopy policy to ensure sustainable development for the future generations of our community. This will bring Falls Church into alignment with our neighboring jurisdictions regarding tree canopy on commercial properties. And with that, I'd like to thank Mayor and City Council for hearing us this evening, and we're looking forward to answering any questions that you have.
Thank you. I think we all learned something new. I didn't know that we had requirements for the parking lots, and given that we don't really build parking lots these days, we probably don't have trees planted for that reason. So thank you for that. Who's got questions or comments?
My question's tied into that. The way you're explaining it made it sound like we wanted to build more parking lots, which I don't think is what we necessarily want to do. So are there other changes that we are allowed by state code to make on a local level that would help with that problem? The problem being trees, not the parking, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
If you go back to the slide with the chart, I think, oh yeah, thank you. So if you see on the chart here, for example, some of the smaller ones are Bayer Volvo and let's see, Southgate and Stratford Beer Garden. So those parking lots do end up getting some trees, but the 10% tree canopy rule, I think, is a good blanket rule to kind of fill in any gaps that don't get addressed by those parking lots. So in several parking lots, you actually do get over the 10% just because of the size and the requirements for the trees. And that's great. But I think what this kind of new rule would address best is the gaps to ensure that we don't get below 10% on any additional sites.
Thank you. I can't imagine anybody's going to argue with that. recommendation, personally.
Okay, who else? Laura?
Thank you. So just so I'm understanding, so Virginia, there will be Virginia code that says that we can require 10% of commercial? That commercial developments have 10%?
Yeah, that code exists now.
Oh, it
so
does
we
exist
have
now.
that
We just have
authority.
never enforced it. Is that right? Or
We've never adopted an
Adopted, sorry.
an ordinance to
Got it.
have that mandate.
Okay.
And that's what's before you now.
Okay, okay. And then that would remove it, if I'm understanding, as I was reading through, like, the staff report was talking about not having that, then made some of that tough with like, when you're working with the developer. So having this sort of on the books would put it out there and make it easier when a developer comes in to say, this is,
Yeah, it would be a mandate, and they
Yeah.
would have to comply with it. And so, this is the initiating resolution. We'll continue to have analysis and sort of more information as we develop code and develop an actual ordinance that would be the next step after the initiating resolution. And we do, we know for the city council and their commercial districts, city council has already adopted many policy goals to accomplish in our commercial properties. And so we will want to engage with discussion in a transparent way about how a canopy coverage mandate influences other goals that the city council has already established. And we think that we'll be able to provide some context so that the council can understand those impacts. But the staff recommendation is to proceed with that 10% as an ordinance that would be a mandate in our commercial districts.
okay. And then, again, back looking at the staff report, I guess the staff recommendation was the 10%, but not giving credit for the native trees, right? And not giving credit for the street trees, is that right?
That is kind of along the lines that we were thinking. Of course, a little bit more analysis of the bonus. We'd have to see what side we would need to land on that. But the focus is the on-property trees.
Okay, okay. No, I mean, that makes sense to me, especially, looking at, Ms. Hiscock and I live near Washington and Broad, and, they do have those nice trees, but they're along the street, and, so I think having them more, not just street trees, but on property makes sense to me. And then I was also interested in the staff report, talked about other jurisdictions have found ways to get even higher tree canopy with their commercial. So, and I think there was going to be some digging into how they do that. That'd be really interesting to find out. But thank you for this report.
Yeah, I agree with this ordinance. I think this is moving us in the right direction. I think I saw this in the staff report, but I just wanted to confirm out loud. So if there is some particularly challenging site where there's a development and it gets to 9% or 9.5%, it can't get to 10% coverage, that is something that we could negotiate during the special exception process going forward.
I believe the designated agent would have waiver rights. Matt, do you want to speak to that?
It's something we're continuing to evaluate between smaller commercial sites. You've seen a few examples in that spreadsheet, and the larger special exception projects. Part of this topic is getting this information out there through various documents. Right now, we're focusing on city code. There are others. There's already 2 area plans that speak to a 15% tree canopy for sites over 5 acres. I think the east and west end both do that. So we're looking at those type of mechanisms, which other jurisdictions do already apply, to kind of start that conversation early so that this isn't an afterthought or we're struggling at the late stages to find the 0.5% to get you to 10. If it's something that is kind of spelled out almost everywhere you look, as you're developing your property in the early stages, it's less of a challenge for developers to achieve.
Gotcha. But there still would, if we adopt this, there still would be flexibility on a project-by-project basis if need be for whatever it is that comes up.
We intend to maintain some of that for the smaller properties only.
Okay.
So the commercial ones, which largely are maintaining a portion of their parking lot, sometimes are just rehabbing existing commercial buildings, and usually are much smaller in size. And I think they can demonstrate that there's a different hardship there in terms of meeting some of those requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Others? Aaron?
Sorry. I guess just picking up on that. So what is the relationship kind of between the landscaping requirements and the tree canopy minimum now? So like you could, you might wanna, so you're thinking you could waive, or you could get below your 10%, or is it that, well, I'll just let you answer it. You're developing the policy on how it will work.
So at the highest level, some ability to modify is just healthy, because we can't establish formulas and prescriptive answers to every single site out there, nor can we predetermine how site consolidation might happen, what type of building and use is proposed. And I think what's generally happening is we get into a debate of how much parking is necessary and what's left over for landscaping. And I think that conversation may need to be revisited. Oftentimes, the applicant themselves may have a better idea of what's required from a parking perspective, rather than just meeting the city's minimal. And I think that's something we may also want to evaluate. Is that something that's competing? To Wyatt's point, you know, we have two things that we want, trying to achieve: make sure we get an adequate, not minimum, but an adequate amount of parking. And even a couple of spaces, I think, could achieve much significant tree canopy goals on most sites.
And I think that would be interesting too, when we get the update on how the revisions to the parking code minimums that we did, or the sort of 1,250 square foot kind of allowance, might interact with this, because by reducing the number of spaces you would need for a change in use, for example, you free up potentially a spot or two, and does that enable an applicant to better be able to meet on site, right, the tree canopy requirement, where, you know, maybe they can have it as part of, like, integrated into the parking in a way that it was getting pushed to the perimeter otherwise. In terms of questions, I just had, they're not really questions, they're points of clarification, I guess, when this gets referred out. In the staff report, my understanding is that really we're making sure that we have an enforceable 10% tree canopy minimum for the B districts, you know, the light industrial, the non-SE by right commercial development that we don't normally yet have, or we don't yet have, even though staff has done a good job, like being able to negotiate actually getting trees on site, or because of the perimeter requirements we've gotten them. The staff report mentions like RM, RTH, RC, and I would just like for us to be like more careful when this goes out, that those are all residential zones right now, right? And so, like, for example, I live in an RC zone, and the way that the zoning requirement is that, like, you can't have more than 50% coverage generally for both building coverage and parking coverage. And so there's basically a 50% open space requirement that basically, you know, incentivizes or allows for, enables, right, like a healthy tree canopy. And so even though the code language is getting at the commercial development, I just ask going forward, we're like clearer that these, when we're listing these other districts that aren't R1A, R1B, that this code provision doesn't actually apply to RM, RTH, or C, because we're in a kind of better place then.
Yeah, and I
we would
think
be.
we can certainly keep revisiting it. What I hope is a little bit clearer is at the end of the report, where I think we begin to preview the actual text changes. I believe the use table, or the zoning district table, tries to make that a little bit clearer, in that the only proposed changes are in those non-residential zoning districts. But we'll keep coming back and make sure.
Yeah, I just mean like as a top line where it says non-residential districts, and then it lists districts that are purely residential districts. And so just to be clear,
Gotcha.
you know, that this is the non-residential commercial minimum tree canopy standard that we're imposing.
Yep.
And then hopefully using this as a baseline in terms of doing better than this in special exception applications. And then just as a point of curiosity, as this moves forward, for those tables, so where we have older site plans that we looked at, and the projected out was that we were gonna be at whatever it is, 20% or 23%. Can we look at some of those to see where we are, for example, on Pearson Square 20 years later? Or, you know, where we are in some of the 2013 developments 10 or 12 years later to see, are we actually on a trajectory? Have we met what our projections were, and are we on a trajectory to kind of meet those things?
So I can start if you guys want to jump into. Part of the challenge in that, and I think why I did a good job explaining it, is there's a resource and data issue. And I think what we're finding is there are sources available to us. And depending on which source you find, they may have a different methodology for establishing that. Some of the data is available for only certain years. Some of it does not have trends available, so it's only like one moment in time, but not any others. So what we're trying to do is make sure that when we return in late November, we can present that information of what we found and try to make some sense of it in the absence of maintaining our own aerial photography that captures annual or semi-annual updates, which could make it easier to establish trends like that for specific projects. So there are resources out there, and we're still compiling them, and there is some imagery as well. But I believe the best, I think, example we can get to, or the limit, is a census block group. I don't think we found anything yet that gets us any further in grain detail than that level, if you were to zoom into a specific project.
Okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense to me. It doesn't totally make sense to me because we do a like current review of site plans, right? So like, don't we do a current on-site tree canopy versus like what the projected on-site tree canopy would be for a site plan? So I'm just trying to determine, when the public looks at this and it goes, oh, the combined tree canopy total for Pearson Square 20 years ago is projected to be at 20%. Like, is there some way we can check whether we got, like, it seems to me like we should be able to do
So
that. I'm
here's-
not, but if it's too resource intensive,
It's
you
more
know.
nuanced than that,
Yeah.
is the real answer. Because yes, there's the data element, but you have to, and we try to intentionally identify which years those approvals happened, because the construction of that happened soon thereafter. And for each example, what ended up happening was some existing canopy was removed to make room for the development. There was a 2-year window in some cases where there was no canopy, and then we started to introduce, fresh trees that would need 15 to 20 years to mature. So depending on when that snapshot takes place, the number will change. And we already know, to Wyatt's point, that a number of these are in their process of maturing, so the numbers will go up, whatever they are right now. But the list is much broader than this. And the reason I think we're highlighting the entire boundary of the city is that, and I don't know if you can bring it up in the presentation, even back in 2014, where most of these projects are located is not where most of the canopy exists. So while we're focusing on non-residential zoning districts, the key issue here is, where does the tree canopy live? Where is most of it concentrated? And I think, as you see in the staff report, we continue to average about 25 to 30 applications for regrading plans in those neighborhoods. So that's something we want to also keep in mind. Yeah, right there. That's where a lot of those applications are happening. In the last decade or so, we've only seen a handful of commercial redevelopments along the commercial districts there. So there's a pretty stark comparison between those two zones.
yeah. No, I appreciate all that, and I totally take the point that the tree canopy loss, happens through a lot of the single-family zoning regrading. I think that the residents, have a concern about, as kind of came up earlier, like urban heat island effects and sort of what is your pedestrian experience in certain areas of the city? Are we doing everything we can to actually promote, pedestrian activity or other modes of transportation that aren't car transportation, because it's comfortable enough to like walk around business districts, and you're in the habit of walking around business districts even when it's, hot, so that, when it cools down, you're not still using your car when you could be walking because it's 70 degrees now. So yeah, it was more just of a, like, can we take lessons learned? But I think we're doing that in moving purely from sort of perimeter requirements into on-site requirements. So as a whole, I, support the tree canopy, enforce, the minimum, and having enforcement. And it's been something that urban forestry has been trying to accomplish for a long time. And so we all appreciate that. And like I said, it's more in the staff report, and I think in the tables also making clear that these are like not yet numbers achieved, but projections in terms of what we were able to secure. on a site plan. Yeah, thanks.
Mary Beth, and then Dave.
Thanks, Mayor Hardy. So if you can go back to what Kurt presented, just one of those charts that Kurt presented.
With the grids.
With the grids, yeah. As I look at, yes, that one, that's good. So that's the Madera Falls Church building. So as I look at that, I keep thinking, but that's not what we approved. There were little areas of green that were in the drawings, but those don't count as tree canopy, do they? They just count as green spaces?
So that's correct. If you look at the kind of the landscaping sheet on the site plan, you do have several places where there are plantings and there are green spaces. But unless it is a tree as defined by the sheet that we use to identify the canopy for each tree, then we don't count it as part of this exercise. So if you can picture the site plan, kind of in that, if you want to call it like the top right quadrant of that square, you can imagine there's a planting area. But all those are either shrubs or kind of ground level plantings that do not meet the requirement to be counted towards tree canopy.
Okay. And then even along the public street at the bottom, those are the front yards of the townhouses, right?
Right, with the kind of the lower plantings that
Yeah,
don't meet the requirements.
But we didn't require any trees there either. Too bad.
Yep.
Okay. So that's an opportunity where we could have required trees, but we just missed it in the review?
I think that's an area where a 10% blanket tree canopy requirement could certainly force the developer and the city to kind of look at a site plan like this and then identify spaces like that to add more trees. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's something else to keep in mind as we look forward. Just there are opportunities that we may have missed because we saw a green patch on the drawing and didn't really look into, is this trees or is this shrubs or what is going in there?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I know Mr. Steiner wants this question, but just piggybacking on Ms. Connolly's. So, and I've never been through a site, I've never been on the council when one of these big developments has been approved and all that, but does the arborist ever look at these and take a look and say, we're a little short on trees here?
100%,
Okay,
every
okay.
time.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Sure, just a quick comment of thanks for addressing this. I'm glad you're getting on this. I'm very interested in next steps. Finally, I'm particularly interested in how other jurisdictions have been able to incentivize more than just the minimum 10%. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. I neglected to actually ask whether our UFC member has anything to chime in on. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, folks. I'm Tim Roche. I'm representing the Urban Forestry Commission tonight. Some of you know this has been a priority for the commission for several years, so we're happy to see it advance. We urge the council to consider it and to approve it expeditiously. I would say the 10% minimum is very much a minimum, and we'd hope to look into what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are doing to achieve a higher requirement. I also said I think enforcement will be difficult, and I feel like 20 years from now, it's much more likely that we'll come up short of the target than we will come up over it. I don't know, how. So 10% really is a minimum, but it is a good starting point, and at least we have something in writing that council can point to when negotiating with developers. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for advocating. So I have a couple comments to wrap us up. So Wyatt and Matt, you kind of buried the lead on this because you mentioned that we are actually seeing a slight decrease in tree canopy, which is different than I think when we've talked about in March, where we thought we were holding steady at kind of 46%, if I remember correctly. So do you have any early indication of how much we're decreasing?
I'll let Matt answer that question, but I think what changed our minds is when we did kind of just take a look at site plan by site plan and looked at the conditions that were there before. We think that it's if you look at our commercial districts, that there's less tree canopy today than there was 20 years ago. So taking 301 West Broad just as an example, that used to be 3 parcels. So in between each parcel, it wasn't by design. It was volunteer trees that had grown up over 50 years. And so these are mulberries, these are locust trees, mimosa trees, And so it's canopy coverage, but I think when we were going through the development process, we didn't really value that as something of great public benefit. And, but when you add it up methodologically, I think that's what the numbers are gonna tell us.
Could we go to that slide that kind of listed out the various places? So we have special exceptions, minor site plans, single-family homes, utilities. There was a slide that listed out kind of the contributors to potentially declining tree canopy loss. I mean, obviously, given that 77% of our land is actually residential, do we have a sense of like which one of these, not this chart, the one that showed the list of,
It's the bulleted list.
yeah. Out of those 5 things on there, which one is contributing? I mean, I guess logic would say that it's probably single family, given that 77% of our land. Do we have a sense of where we might see relative loss, I guess?
So this is where the forensic element of this comes in, where that just when we start to see a number, it's not enough to just, I'm cautious about putting any out there tonight, because what we're doing is comparing that number or any numbers that are generated by third-party data sources to what year is that representing, what's happened leading up to that year, is there an explanation for that number? And it's a very much more comprehensive analysis that, rather than just providing numbers out there, I think we have much more history and kind of rationalization of what that number represents and what it doesn't. I think what was kind of a stark discovery, perhaps, is that when we just try to do a 10-year, I mean, we can go back and back, but just in the last 10 years, looking at how many actual major developments happen, and there's not that many, it feels like, but there hasn't been. And if you just count them on 2 hands and compare them to the number of regrading plans that have happened in areas where we have a lot of tree canopy, I think we're approaching or have exceeded already 300. And while we may have had one example where one house became 4, and yes, 20% applies to them, what I think is more popular example is would you have simply one house being converted to another by expansion, and the tree canopy on that initial condition was somewhere in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're returning that to 20. Now, it's difficult because we have to do visual measurements of that. When those plans come in, they are not required to document what their existing tree canopy is, so our math is always going to be limited by those resources. We do have a lot of visual assessments that I think are going to come into play, but as a result of that, it's complicated. It's probably the best way to answer that. But I think once we return in November, it'll make a lot more sense.
I was referring to the analysis I think planning put out last year that actually noted in the past 20 years, we've had 100 acres of residential redevelopment, and that's 3 times as much acreage as commercial development. So while commercial is very, visible because it's in our commercial corridors, that we have 3 times as much land actually disturbed in residential. And so while we are only talking commercial tonight, I guess both things can be true. We want a bare minimum 10% in commercial. We already have the maximum residential, but I just want to make sure that we at least keep that framing in mind, right? I guess my second question, can we go to the list that showed all the SEs and site plans? It showed, I think, the average that we're hitting 11% without street trees and maybe 17% when we count street trees. So by establishing a 10% floor, and I hate using this term unintended consequence, but is there then motivation that someone like a Quinn Homestretch won't come in with a 17%? Or Broad Washington proposing 16%, because they're like, I only actually have to hit 10. It's always a negotiation because we know it's a floor. But by establishing that, do we end up creating a reverse motivation to not actually exceed that because that's the percentage we put out there? I think we're worried about, obviously, the 5%, 3%, et cetera. We want to do better than that, right? But is there a reverse concern that we won't get the 17 and 18% anymore?
I can start, others can jump in, but having dealt with a lot of developers, the more policy and standards we have and more code references we can enter into the conversation, the better our starting negotiation position will be. And I think the absence of having even a minimum for commercial properties is already a step backward, and we're fighting uphill to even get the bare minimum. And 10% is, in the grander scheme of things, it's nothing. 10% is, depending on who you ask, laughable. We should be doing much more if we, in fact, share the same goals that the metropolitan Washington COG area is establishing for all of us, all these surrounding jurisdictions. So the difference will be in what we can require and what we can ask for. And this is where I think with this information entering into the code, we now have a requirement once adopted. We have other asks, like I mentioned earlier, the East End plan, the West End plan already suggest a 15% goal for sites that are 5 acres or more. So it's that combination that I think puts us in a much better starting point when we negotiate with developers and do so much earlier in the process, as opposed to trying to negotiate for that later on, along with other things that might be coming from that particular site.
Got it. Thank you. Last question. Since I use this analogy, if you give a mouse a cookie, it's going to ask for more. So in the past, when I was the liaison to UFC, so I'm glad to see this coming forward, we've also talked about establishing some minimums for open space or green space or publicly accessible open space. So I want to put it back to kind of UFC and council for us to think about whether that might be the next step, whether we want to have some standards for how much green and open space we have that would play well with kind of this minimum tree canopy standard. So not a request now, but something to think about, because I know that's something that we often negotiate as well. Is we know developers are incented to maximize the building coverage, but we might have a competing desire to have open space. So something to think about. Thank you. Any final thoughts, questions? Okay. Thank you. It's interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you for first reading, right? Or the referral,
Initiating.
the initiating resolution, yes.
Sally is the initiating resolution.
Speaking of initiating resolution, that's the next item up for some zoning cleanup.
And so Jack Trainer is taking his place at the table. He's our lead planner on this case, and he's been working with our zoning administrator, Akita Ruzzi, to identify areas of the code that need clarification. And so we don't think they're substantive on a policy basis, but they are important that we address. And so, Mr. Trainer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, City Council. Jack Trainer, Senior Planner. And tonight's request of council is actually a work session on a request to initiate zoning amendments to the zoning ordinance. These are cleanup items. There's 3 of them. They are clerical in nature, so nothing substantive, as Mr. Shields was describing. And the table collecting those are begins on line 16 of the staff report. And they involve amending the half-story definition, which references an accessory dwelling and is actually in conflict with the accessory dwelling ordinance that was updated recently. It references height when a half-story turns into a full story if you have a janitor living there. So, of course, the accessory dwelling ordinance doesn't regulate height by who was living in there, but just height. And so the proposal is to remove a second clause from the half-story definition to bring into conformance with the accessory dwelling ordinance. We also have a proposal to update the antenna ordinance. That's in section 4812, beginning in section 481204 of the staff report. This was written before basically telecommunication satellites were commonplace, and our antenna ordinance basically specifies that it applies to conventional television and radio antennas and satellite television antenna. And so in order to accommodate for all satellite types that the city receives applications for, this cleanup item is simply removing the specification to what type of antenna that this ordinance applies to, and it would capture just all antenna types that come in. Antennas require a special use permit to install on a lot, and we've also included a new definition describing what an antenna is and all the accompanying apparatus and things that are involved in basically running and using their antenna, so that all of that is subject to screening requirements and the appropriate regulations. And then lastly, staff's recommending deleting an obsolete code section. This is section 481104. It's one line, and is basically came about, as far as we can tell, from various previous code updates and amendments that left this hanging. Its title is Conditional Uses Permitted by Special Use Permits are Prohibited, which sounds really scary, but it's actually in conflict with all of the special use permit conditional uses that are laid out specifically in each zoning district. And so this is an obsolete code section. And so those are the 3 cleanup items. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay. Who's got questions about these cleanup things? I just had one. Do we hope, I know that the antenna one was from 1986. How old was the janitor reference? Do we know?
I'm not sure. I'm guessing pretty antiquated. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when that was put in there, but certainly it's
Old
not.
as our parking code?
Potentially.
Okay. Justine?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is whoever wrote that also probably wrote our parking code. This whole process came about, it seems like partly because you were going through updating things with accessory dwellings. Does this completely clean up our code, or are there a lot of other things in there that are probably antiquated and a bigger review would be warranted?
We've got a running list of things that staff comes across when administering the code, like, oh yeah, that seems kind of weird. They, I believe this is the last of the more clerical, least substantive updates. We've got other updates or, cleanup items that are, vary on the scale of substantive. Certainly not as grand a scale as like T-zones or accessory dwellings, but things that probably warrant more conversation and feedback than these more straightforward cleanups. So we do have a larger list that we'll be coming back to council with in the future.
Great, okay, so this is sort of like low-hanging fruit.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, who's got? Okay. I just had more of a final question or feedback. So obviously it's great that we're doing this periodic cleanup. It's worth considering using AI to kind of go through our code. I know that it is more commonplace now. I had sent something over to staff. I think Stanford in particular was helping several jurisdictions. They had like a test municipal code AI thing. And I know that city attorney's office was considering using it, but it's pretty manual, obviously, to have to go through it. And it's probably a really good place to consider using technology of where we might have redundant sections or where it doesn't make sense, especially for a model that might be trained on city code. So a suggestion for us to think about.
That's a great point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing these forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. So next up is our year-end financial report for FY25. Thank you, Matt. And our acting finance director, Melissa Ryman, will be providing us a report tonight. I will forewarn council, we've got 27 slides to go through. We can go through them briskly. We did cover a lot of this material with the Budget and Finance Committee on Friday. But the year-end financial report is important for us. It's a time for us to assess the city's financial condition. On one hand, we look backwards. We get good data on our performance for the past year, and then we can apply that both to the current year and assess, are our revenue forecasts for the current year on track, or do we need to make adjustments? I'll cut to the chase. We think we're on track and we're in a good position on our revenue forecast. And where are we as we start thinking about FY27? And so this presentation is a foundation for thinking about next year's budget when the council and the school board get together on December 1st for your joint budget planning session. So that's why we like to take some time and assess at this point. We also know there's a lot of things happening in the National Capital Region, and we're looking for signs of the negativity at the federal level and how that's impacting our local finances, and we'll discuss that. We also are asking for additional funding as a budget amendment for emergency assistance, and we'll talk about that, sort of what the numbers are telling us in that context, what our community is experiencing. And so we have some additional information relative to what we discussed with Budget and Finance tonight. So, Ms. Ryman, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wyatt. Good evening, Council. As Wyatt indicated, I'm here to present the fiscal year 2025 year-end financial report. particularly the results of operations for the general fund. These are preliminary and unaudited and may be subject to change. So other than the fiscal year 2025 results of operations, we're also going to see what the impacts of these actual revenues, what impacts they have on our FY 2026 revenue projections. We're going to talk about the fiscal year 2025 year-end fund balances, what the impact, again, on the revenue share agreement with the schools, potential uses of the fiscal year 2025 year-end surplus, and also next steps that we will be taking shortly. So for fiscal year 2025, our tax revenues came in at 0.5% or $466,000 under the projections. These are offset by other revenues coming in at $2.4 million or 13.5% over projections, for a total revenues exceeding our projections of almost $2 million or 1.7%. Added to this, we did have underspending in our expenditures of 0.5% or $630,000. In total, our surplus comes to about $2.6 million. Now, our permits revenues also came in above budget by around $274,000, and in the past, we have set that aside towards funding our future needs for building inspections. And so without the excess revenue and permits, we are coming in at around $2.3 million surplus for fiscal year 2025. On the next slide, we'll just take a look quickly at the tax revenues. As mentioned earlier, tax revenues came in at about $466,000 under budget. Real property and personal property tax are still coming in above budget, with personal property tax got a boost from car tax, cars that were added during the fiscal year. Sales tax came in slightly under budget at 2.3% or $173,000. Meals tax came in at 10.4% under projections, or $672,000. And business licenses came in at negative 6.4% or $380,000 under budget. On the next slide, we have more details about the other revenues. We've discussed licenses and permits earlier, with charges for services also came in above budget at 9.3% or $395,000. Mostly these are from recreation and parks fees. We were budgeting it, we had reduced the budget slightly just because we knew it was going to be closed for some part of the spring time. However, Recs and Parks staff were able to actually offer classes during the spring when they were in temporary locations. A big part of our revenue excess was from investment and investment income, which came in at about 1.1% over budget or 56%. With our revenue, with our investment returns coming in between 4 and 4.5% over fiscal year 2025. Other revenues, such as fines specifically, came in over budget by about 6.6% or $687,000, and most of that is from the speed camera fines. So total other revenues came in at $2.4 million or 13.5% above budget. And again, without permits revenue, that's around $2.16 million or or 12.8% over budget. So as Wyatt mentioned, it is important to look at these FY 2025 results in the context of what we're going to see in fiscal year 2026, or what we had projected for fiscal year 2026. This chart shows the economic indicators, namely personal property tax, sales tax, meals tax, BPOL, and some other taxes. So in order to meet our projections for fiscal year 2026, we are going to, these taxes will need to grow by a total 2.6% to meet those FY 2026 projections. If council recalls, during the budget season, we did revise the budget projections mid-season, and where we reduced revenues by 1.2 million. These are based on signals that we were getting during the fiscal year, towards the third quarter of the fiscal year, when revenues that we were projecting weren't coming in as expected. So had we not done that downward adjustment, before the budget was adopted, we would have needed around $2 million, or 6.5% growth over fiscal year 2025 actuals. So because of that change that we made, we are actually in a stronger position to weather negative impacts and surprises that might be coming our way in fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027. Just to put it in context, we have provided the growth history of our economic indicators, these same economic indicators with a 3-year growth, 5-year average growth, and 10-year average growth. You'll see that the numbers have been quite high over for 3 and 5 years, and 10-year growth and the last year's growth were actually fairly similar at around 4.5%. Based on these, again, just looking at what we needed to grow from the previous page of 2.6%, we are seeing that we're in good stead, just based on these economic growth histories. So with the deficit in local tax revenues of $465,000, as far as revenue sharing with the schools, there would be no tax revenues to share with the schools for fiscal year 2025. This is strictly based on the revenue sharing agreement that we have with the schools. In the past, we have, if there is a need from the schools, we have provided them with revenues from other than tax revenue sources. As far as our general fund balance goes, with the addition of the $2.3 million to our unassigned fund balance, we will end the fiscal year 2025 with almost $22.5 million in unassigned fund balance, which is equivalent to 18.2% of our fiscal year 2026 projected expenditures. Capital reserves is at $15.1 million. We have programmed $2.8 million of that in fiscal year 2026, and around $9 million between fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 2031 for CIP. Permit fee reserves, we're ending the year at almost $2.8 million, and we have programmed $1.2 million of that for use in fiscal year 2026. Our total available fund balance as of June 30, 2025 is around $40.4 million, or 32.7% of the fiscal year 2026 expenditures. The next slide just shows a history of our unassigned fund balance. And it's a little bit small in this slide, but in order to maintain a 17% target of fiscal year 2026 expenditures, of the $2.3 million that we're adding to unassigned fund balance, we would need to retain $870,000 of that in unassigned fund balance, which leaves about $1.4 million that could be deployed for other uses. The next slide also just provides, this is a forward-looking review of the available fund balance for the city. It includes unassigned fund balance, capital reserves, and building permit fee reserves. And this gets us through the 6-year CIP. It does show that we are, these shows compliance with our targeted fund balance policies of 17% unassigned and 20% available total. The next slide provides a little bit more detail on these projections for capital reserves. As mentioned earlier, we're going to end the year with $15.1 million in capital reserves for fiscal year 2025. We do have drawdowns expected over the next 6 years to be used for CIP and also for infrastructure maintenance. We've programmed about $800,000 of use of capital reserves for infrastructure maintenance over the next 6 years. You'll notice an addition of $70.6 million in fiscal year 2029. That is a portion of the expected payments from the phase 2 of West Falls. We are expecting a total of $10 million with $800,000 being received annually between fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2028. So those are not shown here because those are currently programmed to be used for debt service on the school debt over the next 3 years.
I guess, shouldn't we still just show them as additions, but then we're drawing it down for debt service?
This is meant to be a capital reserve projection, so it's not money going into capital reserves. That's why they're not listed. But Melissa and I were having the same conversation. For transparency, just to remind everybody, what the comprehensive agreement states is that phase 2 is already priced at $10 million or fair market value, whichever is higher. The developer has till FY29 to take action on that acquisition. If they don't want to acquire it in FY26, they have to make an $800,000 payment to essentially purchase another year, an extension on their option to purchase at that price. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. We do sorry to shift topics. We do plan to sit down with Hoffman and discuss what their thoughts are about phase 2. They've been sort of bringing it up, but we haven't talked with them about it probably for years now. And we know it's of great interest to the whole community and the school community. And so I think it's just as we're thinking about the next year, I think that will be an important discussion we'll be having is about phase 2 at West Falls.
I know, sorry, we're all digressing here, but as you know, it's going to have quite the impact on that secondary campus. I was on school board when we approved phase 2, but and I know you'll do this, but just to put it out there, just including the new superintendent and the new CFO in the school, because it's all new people now who weren't around when we approved phase 2 on the school board sides. Thanks.
Sorry, so just because I'm not as familiar with the phase 2 arrangement, so this 7.6 million is contingent on what, or guaranteed to us for sure?
The price is set forward in the comprehensive agreement. I need to read it again, and I will send it around. I think it's worthy of its own work session discussion with the document right in front of us to make sure I don't misstate anything, because we just haven't been thinking a whole lot about Phase 2 in recent months, and so we'll do that with the document in front of us.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just wanted, it's just going from the 6.1 in the ending balance of whatever that is, fiscal year 2028, and then the reliance on the 7.6, just how confident are we in the bump up in the capital reserve actually coming through and being able to rely on that sort of in the projections? Because when then you look at the fund balance over time, like the, whatever it is, 15 to 17%, chart little line graphs on the bar graph, I guess it assumes the 7.6 million coming through. So I just want to make sure that when we're looking at the lines and it seems like, oh, we're in a healthy place relative to the policies, that we're keeping in mind that it's premised on a $7.6 million infusion into capital reserves. Okay.
I don't think this chart depends on that. Like the 17% is the orange line, and you can see unassigned fund balance is at 17%.
Right. The middle line is the 17% of expenditures. So just as a reminder, the available fund balance policy, which requires us to have a target of between 15% and 20% of expenditures, is there for when we're exceeding one of our debt ratios. We expect that we will come off of that and we'll actually meet those debt ratios in, I believe it's either end of fiscal year 2027 or fiscal year 2028. So as we wean ourselves off that requirement, we'll just have the 17% unassigned fund balance requirement.
Said a little differently, that purple section, that purple part of the bar chart, is something we didn't have up until 2018. We didn't have a capital reserve. We were building up capital reserves in anticipation of all this debt. So once we are past that high peak debt service where we are exceeding the debt to expenditure ratio or the payout ratio, we only need to hit the 12 to 17% unassigned fund balance per our financial policies. We added to financial policies in 2018, anticipating that we would have a lot of debt and that we made ourselves get to 15 to 20% total reserves. And that's why we are holding $40 million in reserves as of end of FY25. So after FY20, is it 28 or 29? We only need to be between that green and orange line, correct?
We do have a capital reserve policy separate from the unassigned fund balance policy, where we said we would keep around $3.75 million in capital reserves.
Keeping like 10 to 15 million there was a new thing that we did in anticipation of all this debt service. So, I think several of us were pretty sensitive to the fact that we were holding $40 million, of taxpayer money, but because of the high debt, that was what made us comfortable and made our ratings agencies comfortable.
No, that totally makes sense, and thank you both for the sort of going back through it. And I think just, in my mind, it's sort of just what are we going to be able to rely on sort of in the same way in the next 2 to 4 years, even in terms of income streams, so to speak, in grants, all sorts of things that are going to affect somewhat what this is looking like and what local contributions are going to be toward, things that we were maybe even just doing 50% matches on for the last, 5 to 7 years.
That is definitely something we will need to really monitor and look at and make sure that if that influx of money is not available, that we'll be able to pivot to either other sources of revenue or realign our CIP and our infrastructure maintenance costs accordingly.
What is the 2 million addition this year?
That includes the 1.6 million that we put in from FY 2024 surplus. And then we receive $460,000 of developer contributions towards certain capital improvements.
Those were the Founders 2 ones you mentioned.
Founders Row 2, yes.
All right, Madera.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So just to summarize our fiscal year 2025 results, tax revenues came in at $466,000 under budget. We did have other revenue surpluses of $2,164,000. Added to that of underspending of $635,000, we're looking at a net surplus of $2,333,000. In order to maintain our fund balance, our unassigned fund balance at 17% of the FY 2026 projected expenditures, will need to retain $871,000 of that in unassigned fund balance, leaving us with a net available amount of $1,462,000 that could be deployed for other uses. That's a segue into what we've kind of discussed as a staff for the uses of the fiscal year 2025 surplus. Some of these have been discussed with council in the past. Particularly, we have the solid waste cost transition, including the transition for the organics bins. That's $207,000 in total. The demolition for the properties that we bought at Sharrow and Cameron for $80,000. We have an unspent amount of $25,000 in arts and humanities that we're asking council to reappropriate for fiscal year 2026. Where there's also a request for emergency financial assistance of $20,000, which we're going to provide a little bit more information later. There is also a request to increase our funding for the Vietnamese Community Outreach Program for $30,000. We have $12,000 for the Planning Commission stipends. Staff has requested that we put $26,000 of vehicle surplus sales towards fleet replacement. And there's some underspending of our 1% transient occupancy tax that we typically allocate towards business district improvements for $22,000. And there's one or two things, and I can't remember what they are right now, or miscellaneous items for around $17,000. This leaves a little over $1 million of the surplus, and we're proposing that we place that in capital reserves for future needs. So the next slide is something that our Department of Human Services provided us for history on our emergency financial assistance. You'll see in FY 2023-24, with the COVID, during COVID time, we did increase our financial assistance. In fiscal year 2026 to date, we have spent $10,000 of our $25,000 budget. So if we annualize that $10,000, that's going to get us to around $40,000 for fiscal year 2026. Compare that to 2025, when we spent around $23,500 for emergency financial assistance. So the request of $20,000 that we showed earlier will add to the $25,000, giving us $45,000, which will cover the annualized estimate with a little bit of buffer. One of the things, though, is that we haven't really seen a whole lot of increase based on people coming off of the deferral program for federal revenue, for the federal employees. And we don't think we haven't seen much from the impacts of the shutdown. Although we did have, forgive me, there were 3 clients in fiscal year 2025 who were federal employees. So in short, we're not sure that the $20,000 would be sufficient to cover us for the rest of the year. We're still early enough in the fiscal year that we don't have that information yet.
Sorry, Melissa, I'm really confused on this chart. So FY25, we just ended, we didn't use 13,000?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. I mean, we were, the total of almost $26,000 that you see there between the available and the actual, I think only 10,000 we actually appropriated in the budget. Staff was able to cobble together some monies from underspending in other areas to add to the original budget.
Okay.
So we ended up spending $23,500 last year.
Okay, and I feel like I've asked this every time, but what does unduplicated mean again?
Unduplicated means those are the number of distinct customers that we have, clients that we have. And some of them came back once or twice, and so they were able to provide or receive a total of 36 services. Each client has a limit of $1,000 for the fiscal year, for each fiscal year, and some of them will use that in one time for rent assistance. Some of them may come back once or twice because they just need a little bit for utilities.
So 1,000
Every
is
time.
for everything?
Everything,
Per person?
correct.
Do we
That's
find
correct.
that we have more people hitting up against that cap as things have gotten more expensive? Have we adjusted it for inflation?
I don't know that we've adjusted it for inflation in the last few years, but looking at the FY 2026 expenditures so far, we see that a lot of them are for rent, and it's $1,000, right away.
If you have 10 unduplicated and you've spent 10,000, that's pretty.
Right, right. I think we only have maybe a couple that were for utilities.
I guess the question that we've asked in council is, 1, do we have more people seeking services? 2, are they requesting more than we can provide? Are they more intense in terms of their needs? So I guess I'm curious whether we should revisit the $1,000 cap, especially in light of inflation. Like if people need utilities and need rent and need food, those are all essential safety net services that we should provide. I don't know whether 1,000 just makes sense if that's just been our policy for 20 years. But I guess I'd like some information to know what the requests have been, to know whether 1,000 is enough or maybe it's not, because I'd like to know what the demand is. Yeah, Mary Beth.
So Melissa or Wyatt, or as I look at this chart, the first 2 bars are FY23 and FY23 ARPA, and then we got 24 and 24 ARPA. So does that mean in FY23 we had like 130 requests for services? Some was paid for out of ARPA and some out of city budget? So
That's correct, yes.
So in 23, that seems like a long time out from COVID. Like that's a big jump in 23. Do we know what we needed in 22 or 21? Why is that one so big, I guess is my question.
When we got and allocated the ARPA dollars, probably.
In 23?
I think that is when we started getting the,
Spend it.
Yeah.
But it makes me think that we are turning people away, because when we had the money, we clearly spent it. So
Right.
right now, we don't have the ARPA funds. Are we turning a whole bunch of people? Are we turning $70,000 worth of requests away?
Or
we'll have to see how many requests we have. Currently, we've been of the requests that we have, I don't believe we've turned away anybody. However, if they were requesting $1,500 and we could only give $1,000, I don't know that information.
And so the same with 24, then, we actually had 84 clients in fiscal year 24. And then a big drop in 25, just down to,
84 services,
right,
yes.
yeah, okay. And we put emergency money in the budget. Is that this money or other money? When we did the budget, we set aside.
We added around $10,000
Just
to the
10,000?
emergency
Okay.
financial assistance
Okay,
in the adopted budget.
Yeah, so just over 25,000 is in the operating budget. And in addition, the council had a $160,000
$116,000.
$116,000 contingency, really, that was intended for this type of need.
so that budget then for FY 26 could actually go up to 116.
It would need another council action. Right now, it's residing in council
Okay.
contingency, so before we access it, the council will need to approve it.
Okay, but it's there
That's
if we
right.
need it. Okay, thanks.
And important to note that was the intent of it and when it's brought back to council.
So basically, Melissa, then, when you said you're annualizing to get to the 40,000 or so, but we haven't yet seen the sort of additional population of people we expected to see. And so to the extent that we find we need more than the 40,000 based on the number of people who ultimately seek services, or we look at the level of services and realize for food, rent, and utilities, the cap may need to be higher, we have that beyond a budget amendment, 116 built in to help offset what might be costs over 40,000.
That is correct. Sorry. As far as next steps, we are planning on coming to council for a work session on the budget amendment on October 20th with a final adoption on November 10th. We will also be preparing to provide first quarter financial reports to the Budget and Finance Committee on November 14th. Also, as far as the FY 2027 budget, we're planning on, we have a joint session with the school board on December 1st, wherein we will be presenting preliminary revenue projections and cost drivers from both sides, general fund and schools. And then on December 8th is when council is expected to provide budget guidance for the fiscal year 2027 budget preparation. We do have several trend graphs for our key economic indicators in the packet. And we'll go through them quickly. So we have the personal property tax. Again, we don't need to grow a whole lot in order to meet our fiscal year 2026 revenues. Actually, we're a little bit, our FY25 actual is a little bit higher than our fiscal year 26 projection for personal property tax. Sales tax will require a growth of 2% in the next year. And meals tax will require a growth of 4.3% in the next year. We do have another graph for meals tax, and this kind of just shows that in the last 3 months of the fiscal year, we did receive higher than fiscal year 2024 numbers between March and June. of the last fiscal year 2025. And then business licenses. This is one where we'll need to grow 5.3% in the next year. And our average growth on that has been a little bit less than 5.3% in 3 years and the 10 years average. Other taxes, we're also going to need to grow by 4.2% over the next fiscal year to meet our revenue projections. We've also provided some prior year averages, 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year for school transfer. The seat enrollment doesn't include the September 30 numbers yet. These are all prior years. General government growth also is included there. Tax revenue organic growth, population growth, and the CPIU growth, CPIU in the Washington, D.C. area. We also have expenditure graphs in the next 3 or 4 slides. You'll see we were sort of flat between 2000, general government, specifically between 2014 and 2021. We did start adding personnel in 2022 through 2026, thereby adding to that growth that you see there. A little bit more detail on the general government expenditures is in this slide. For our fiscal year 2026, we have about $55 million in general government expenditures, $34 million of which is in personnel, $2 million for WMATA, and the remainder of $19 million are on supplies and contracts. And the next slide just provides a little bit more information on the personnel costs that we have. As you can see, between 2017 and 2021, again, we were kind of flat. And then in 2022 to 2026, that is when we started adding positions. Some of them are for building safety, some in public safety, in order to manage the demands from the growth. And the last slide just provides FTEs for our general fund permanent positions. So over the last 10, 11 years, we've added about 55 positions, FTEs, I should say. That concludes the presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them or find the answer for you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa, especially for those of us who saw it a second time. Thank you. Laura?
Well, thank you very much for that presentation, and it was nice having a little preview of this at Budget and Finance on Friday. And I'm going to steal Mayor Hardy's headline here that, even though our tax revenues came in below what we projected, overall, they were still higher. I think it's 4.3% higher from the previous year. So I think that's just something that I think sometimes, we didn't meet that budget projection, but we are over where we were the previous year. So I just think
that's correct.
Needs to be noted for the community. So I just have a couple comments and questions. One is, so on the surplus, this is just for my colleagues on the council. I've been door knocking, and one of the things that's when I meet with people who are senior citizens, one of the things they talk about is that the news press is their main source of information. I know Mayor Hardy does a great blog. we have a great newsletter that goes out from the city office, but I think some of our senior citizens don't utilize the online things as much. So I'd like us to sort of think about, would it be good, in our best interest, to maybe run, you know, and I don't know how often it would be, how big it would be, but some sort of ad in the news press to say, because I think the couple residents I talked to said that they don't know what's coming up on the agenda. So, you know, maybe it's something every other week we run a small little ad in the news press saying, this is what's coming up, this is what we discussed, just to throw that out there. Because I do think, again, just door knocking, like our senior citizens, I feel like don't feel as informed as I think others who will be online and looking at things. So I just throw that out there if we have some money. But anyway, on to the presentation. So I was looking at the meals, the budget for meals tax, and at first it seemed optimistic to me, but is that because this last quarter has bumped up? Is that why you're thinking it would go up? I think it was like a 4% increase, or it's
Yeah, we're projecting that we will need to increase by 4.3%
Yeah.
in order to meet our fiscal year 2026 projections. We are still optimistic that that is achievable, although, you
and that's
know,
based
it
on
is.
this last quarter, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. I mean,
Took a dip third quarter, and then we bounced back up. fourth
correct.
quarter. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And then this is just a point of clarification. The sales tax also, does that also include online purchases? And I remember, Mr. Shields, you said that that's been down, right? And we think that might be an economic indicator.
We think so. And the detailed report in the council packet, I think, has numbers that breaks that out.
That is correct.
Online was
Yeah,
down
on the
6.5%
memo.
over last year. So everything, all the local indicators, so sales, grocery, meals, people, all were up over last year, except online was down 6.5%.
Right,
That's notable.
right.
One, you know, and I know, Mayor, I think this is really good, as I've been talking to people in the community, to remind them, you know, Mayor Hardy, you always say, shop local, eat local. And I think people think of that as, because to support local businesses. But I always try to explain to them, no, it's actually because also your sales tax and your meals tax comes back to the city and to the schools. And I think sometimes that's lost on them. So I do try to remind the public that that's actually helping us with those tax revenues. Personal property tax, that was interesting to me because we're still not charging. I know Ms. Underhill had brought this up a ways back. We're still not even charging what we could, right, for personal property tax.
Correct.
Okay.
Our current rate is $4.80 for vehicals.
Okay.
And
That's something
we
to
could
keep in our
charge-
back pocket if we
Correct.
ever needed to. Okay.
Right.
I'm almost done, and then I'll let everyone go. I thought, you know, reading, this is from the slides, I thought it was interesting, some of the, you know, showing that we have, you know, Falls Church has had a bump in unemployment. You know, the more, we've had more requests for car payment, payment plans. I think we used to have 15 and now we have 40. We've gotten more, you know, exceeded our budget amount for tax relief. So I think we are starting to see, as the mayor had talked about, you know, in the last year or two, we all had talked about knowing the federal, you know, employees would be affected, that we're starting to see the beginnings of that. Mr. Shields, I wanted to ask, Ms. Flynn and I were just talking on the investments in rent. What's rent? Is that, I was thinking it's community center, but what else would that rent consist of? Is that our Virginia Village?
No.
Okay.
In fiscal year 25, we saw the last rent income for the Fairfax Water, from Fairfax Water for a property yard. So that's, you know, no longer in the fiscal year 2026 budget. But correct, some of the rent, a small amount is from Parks and Recs.
Right. And shout out to them, because I know with this community center being closed for that geothermal, they still were able to do that. So that was terrific. And then this is in the budget report. I'm sorry, I'm kind of, but this is in the budget report. We didn't really cover this in your presentation, but I guess this is for Mr. Shields. I was looking at lines 125 through 136 of the staff report, and it was talking about, this is about the sewer. I'm sorry, this is way off. But it was talking about, it seemed to me, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this, that we had 4.4 million in available funds, and that 8.8 would be required by the Fairfax Capacity Purchase Agreement. Am I understanding that right?
Thank you for bringing that up.
And I'm sorry, this
Actually-
is a staff report, so this is not your slides presentation. This is
Right.
yeah.
On the staff report
Yeah.
itself, line 100,
It's like 125.
125.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we're ending the fiscal year with $8.5 million of availability fees for the sanitary sewer fund. And Fairfax County, at least for the purchase of the capacity itself at the treatment plant, we're going to require $8.8 million in calendar year 2025 or maybe early 2026.
Okay.
And we do expect some additional availability fees to come through from some developers that will help towards making that payment.
Okay. So
Right.
you're feeling okay about that? It's
Maybe
Mr.
I
Shields'
shouldn't. I'll defer to Wyatt on that, but.
Well, we've discussed it extensively about how to meet these challenges of purchasing, as well as the other needs that come with that purchase. And as we've briefed council, what has been discussed is having a detention vault to deal with the inflow and infiltration. As an alternative that we're currently in discussions with Fairfax County is to pay for a pipe that would be downstream of the city that would also meet the county's needs. That will come in. We'll have a briefing for the council on what the cost of that would be. It is less than what the detention basin was, so that's trending in a positive direction for us. But again, to cover the cost of that, we do not have sufficient availability fees to pay for that aspect.
Okay.
And we have an alternative plan of finance for that. The bottom line of which is to protect our ratepayers from paying the cost of that, but to have growth pay for the cost of that. And so we think we can meet these needs without unusual increases to the rate structure for the sanitary sewer fund.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shields. I'm sorry that but I just wanted to call attention to that because I thought that was interesting. I know we talk a lot about sewer capacity. Thank you, that's it for me.
Okay, who else? Laura, you asked all the questions. I just had one. So normally around this time, we usually hire the demographer, or at least the schools hire one, and sometimes we collaborate depending on whether we have needs. Is that in the plan for this year or not?
So we were not planning to do that. We did that last year as I was envisioning that as being sort of a once every 5 years type of an effort. But
Did it 2 years ago, I think for the comp plan chapter we were updating, and then the schools happen to want that. I just didn't know whether that was a annual exercise that one or both needed, so.
I kind of assumed it was an every year thing, but.
Could we just
But
follow
I
up with?
don't- yeah.
Well, I
guess school
think
staff?
in this, I mean, we haven't gotten the September 30th numbers, but for the students, it doesn't match what we thought the projections were. So I think it's a particularly important time to be working with the demographers. I don't know, maybe that's just the school side, but.
But I remember when we used to do budget, I don't know how it will be with the new superintendent, but when Peter used to present his budget, that's when we would get the stats of like the English language learning community, like the numbers to see like where drops were, which I think is something that we were wondering if, but Arlington has those same, has that same drop, so it's not just us.
I guess it's just a question, whether we need to start that contract or not. Sounds like not, but maybe a question for the school staff, whether they plan to bring back the demographer for 26, 27 school year.
Don't the schools do one every year anyway? Because they used to use Weldon Cooper, and then they switched to the. George made, yeah.
I think it's part of that whole budget process. And again, I don't know now with the new superintendent, but generally I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, my assumption was that with what we got with the Fuller Institute was a more granular look about development, and so layer that on top of what Weldon Cooper provides for us to have a more comprehensive look. I understood that to be a one-time exercise, and then we'd use what the Fuller Institute gave us and apply it going forward. The time when we need to redo it is when we have new development coming on in the future. That's the way I had seen it, but I'll talk with the staff and if school staff, if they're envisioning a need, we'll certainly collaborate with them on it. We are looking forward to the enrollment report, and the school staff do a great job with that. And I mean, if you'll just read last year's report, it was incredibly well presented in terms of the way they broke out the data, and there's just a lot of information that's quite useful in that report. The city staff had very little to do with that, so the school staff get all credit for that transparency that we have in terms of where students come from by housing type.
Can we go to slide 14? This also seems like the time when we usually have a conversation about, are these the things that city council wants, how we want to use the surplus? And in listening to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday, the way the revenues have fallen, there is nothing to split with the school division, which is the first time in a while that has happened. I'm glad you had a preliminary meeting with the new staff and leadership of the school division just to explain how that all works. I think that's really important, and it sounded like that was a good meeting, which is good for leading into as we start to talk about the budget. But are there other things that people wanted to put in for using the surplus that we haven't discussed?
Well, like I said, I would like us, I mean, we'd have to get the, majority of the council to agree, but I would like us to see, and I don't know if this would be even a substantial cost, but maybe every other week running some sort of half page. This is what's happening with city council in the news press myself. But again, I know that we need the majority of the council to sign off on it.
I guess I would go back to maybe the unfunded needs from the budget and say what's below the line. We can figure out what the line is, right? What would be below the line that at least is up for consideration if there are other needs that we did not get to in the budget.
Yeah, and did staff look at that at all? Or do we need to put 1.02 million in capital reserves? So this is everything above that bottom line is what's available?
Yes, so this represents, my recommendation.
Yeah.
And we looked at various different things that we need to get done over the current year. I do have a bit of a view on this, and that is that the general government budget has had healthy growth in the last 3 fiscal years. And so I believe we have our hands full and delivering the things we've already committed to. So, in talking with staff, and staff always has lists of needs that they have. I've encouraged staff to think about it sort of more positively, that they've been, we have had increases in resources, and let's focus on what we've already committed to doing.
Okay. One of the things I know we funded several years ago with surplus was the utility box art program. Is that now in the budget to do more, or was that just a one-time, one-off? We could do 4.
Well, look who's here. Holly is here.
Oh. But I think it's a different grant.
And Holly is here for the next item, which is the consent preview for the arts grant funding.
Right.
So it's a great question.
So we have money for 4 more boxes, but we were told by DPW that they are currently reviewing the utility boxes and have asked us to pause the project until they gave us until later this year. And I plan to reevaluate the project in the beginning of the new year.
Okay. It's good to know that there's some funding to do that. I think that was a popular thing, and we should not let that fall off the radar. Thanks. No, so as far as these other things, that makes sense. But does the 1.02 million, I'm sorry, I know as we went through those other slides, does this match with exactly how much has to go into capital reserves? Or is this just,
That's just the remainder.
this just the remainder?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. This is outside of the 870,000 we need for unassigned fund balance.
Right, so this is just extra little icing, or
Right.
big icing on the cake. Okay, thank you.
And so we may need to add the utility boxes, actually, Holly, if we didn't encumber that yet.
I think Amy said she was going to. I can talk to her
Okay,
about it tomorrow.
we'll take a look at that. So that might need to be a carry forward
Okay.
request.
And as you described some of these, they are carry forwards. They were in the budget, weren't spent.
A majority of what's listed here is actually new items. The only real carry forward might be the Arts and Humanities grant. But the remainder of it is mostly new items.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave?
Madam Mayor, two quick questions. Does the Economic Development Office interview business owners to get a granular sense about what they're seeing? Because some negative trends might show up there first. The second point is that we share this economic data now with the schools as soon as possible. And the third point is, I guess with this government shutdown and the threats to fire people, I think extreme caution is probably the right approach, as well as I totally agree with setting aside money, which hopefully the worst case can't happen and we can free up and either return to taxpayers or put in other programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. The superintendent and members of the school board were with us at Budget and Finance, so they saw all this last Friday, too.
Okay.
And
Great. How about the Economic Development Office speaking with business owners?
so our Economic Development Office is in contact with business owners and kind of constantly trying to have their finger on the pulse. We have not in our revenue forecasting process, however, which is a little bit of a different question than what you're asking. We have not had a practice of bringing business leaders into the room as we're thinking about our revenue forecasts. And I think that is something that we should consider doing, so we understand from restaurateurs' perspective what they're seeing, from just have some representative businesses, and I think that would be helpful to us going forward, particularly in areas where we think there's going to be, we feel the atmosphere is we're in an era of a lot of headwinds. And so what are people on the street actually experiencing in the business community? So we will commit to do that, I think, as we're putting together FY27 revenue forecasts.
Other questions, comments? Debbie?
Yeah, I have been asked this question, and so I will throw it out there on the revenue, revenue sharing. It's been, since we've been doing a formal revenue sharing program, it's been very positive economic results at the end of each year, and this is the first year, to Mary Beth's point, that we've been negative on the revenue surplus. We talk about in good times and bad, you split the deficit and we split the surplus. Has there any been, I don't know that the general government needs that, but I don't know what the schools planned on, and I haven't listened to the Budget and Finance, so maybe you guys already talked about this on Friday. How do we talk about that in terms of revenue sharing? Does my question make sense?
So in principle, there is the idea that it's a revenue sharing agreement in good times and bad. So when we went through COVID and we revised down our revenue forecast significantly, schools and general government participated in that. Last year when we revised revenues down, the schools, we had a dialogue about kind of what that would mean with the school budget. So that is what the intent of the principles are. At year end, the intent is to share tax revenues that come in above budget. Do we ask the schools to make a transfer to the general government when we come in below on local government taxes? No. We joked about it, actually, when we talked about it with Terry and Alicia, but that's not contemplated. And conversely, we do need the city's finances to work for everyone. And it's been kind of an unusual feature that investment returns, which are outside the principle of revenue sharing, have for the past 3 years been big numbers in terms of annual surplus. And so to keep the cooperation going, we've tried to be very open about that. And in the past, the council has used some of that investment revenue money to help the schools meet needs. I think they've purchased some school buses with it. They did the concession stand with it. And so we anticipate that could happen again. So far, we've not received a request from the school administration that's why it's not on this list.
As far as I understood it, Budget and Finance on Friday, I think the school board is taking up that conversation maybe tomorrow night if they have their meeting, that they were going to get the presentation on sort of what their year end looked like and then talk about,
Needs after that,
yeah.
Yeah, I think they're just shifting needs, obviously, through the schools, and we'll get numbers on, I think I'd heard there are more ESOL students or more special ed students, but fewer total number of students, so, where do we all land on that? Just, okay, thank you.
I had a quick question. Could you go back to the surplus? I'm sorry, you probably said this, but I missed it. What's the vehicle surplus sales? What is that? Is that to just replace something?
Yeah, so every year we sell some old vehicles and we get money from that. So staff is asking that we put the proceeds from those sales to the fleet replacement fund, which we started in the CIP 3 years ago, I think. Okay. Yeah, just to help replenish that fund.
Okay, and that's fund is what we use to replace like a police car or something
Correct.
like that? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, I didn't understand. Thank you.
We good? Okay. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
So the last item on the agenda is the Arts Awards, and so Holly Irwin will rejoin us here at the table. And one of the items that's in the staff report is funding for the Levine School that is in the budget. It's something the City Council has built into the operating budget. We had a ribbon cutting and an opening for the Levine School over the weekend. But that is one thing that's outside of the competitive process. I just wanted to note that it is part of this package of arts grants as well. And Holly, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for your work on this.
Yes, thank you. So good evening, everyone. I will be presenting on the competitive arts and humanities grants, then I'll hand it over to Cindy to talk about Levine. So the city has been funding the arts and humanities grant program since fiscal year 2013, and since then has funded a bunch of different arts and cultural programs and organizations throughout the city. This year, a total of $48,500 was awarded. So today I'm recommending the adoption of TR 2525 on the consent agenda on the October 27th meeting. There was a total of, for project grants, $26,210. And then for the operational grants, there was $35,622 in total asks. So what we have allocated via the grant review committee, which convened twice to discuss how they wanted to allocate the $48,500. They're suggesting that $22,468 is allocated towards 6 projects. Those organizations include the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, Creative Cauldron, Studio EDU, the Ketch Foundation, Little City Concerts, and Washington Sinfonetta. The GRC also recommends to allocate $26,032 for 4 operational requests, and those organizations are Tinner Hill, Creative Cauldron, Falls Church Arts, and Washington Sinfonetta. It's pretty short and sweet, but let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Holly? Okay,
This actually relates to the budget that we just were talking about. So since 2013, we've been allocating about 25,000 for operational and about 25,000 for project specific, or at least over the past 5 years, it's been about 25 for each. And then this past year, we just didn't have that money in the budget. And so, is that correct? So that's why that was added on to this, I guess, budget amendment. There's 25,000 in the budget amendment for.
Yeah, and that budget amendment, so let me do a little bit of Levine, and then that'll give me, and we'll loop it up. And this is an allergy voice, not a sick voice, but it is hanging in tonight. In the Levine redevelopment for West Falls, there was square footage set aside for performing arts and education for school use. During that negotiation, it was deemed and targeted towards Levine School of Music. In the budgets for FY25 and 26, you have specific designated $25,000 for Levine, and they would be providing some programming for this community as a whole and some of our city services and schools. In working on the eligibility in which the state code would allow the city to allocate that, and working with the city attorney, we need to put it through the grant process. So the budget is there, but the authority through the grant process didn't happen, so now we're aligning it. So it's going through the art process, but it's not competitive because it was designated for Levine, but they are meeting the same goals, and they will have to do an application, and they'll meet all the reporting. The process to get from that determination to today didn't happen during FY25, so that's why on the budget amendment, you're seeing 25,000 is to carry the money over into 26, so we can spend it, assuming approval on October 27th. It'll be $2 amounts for a total of 50,000, 25,000 for last fiscal year and 25,000 this fiscal year.
And so that's specifically for Levine, not the human, or the arts
The
grant.
competitive
Okay,
grants.
so the arts grant stuff is already, that's in our budget, it's not something that got, okay, that's helpful to know.
And I will just note the programming and working with Levine, they're offering 11 programs that will be with community accessible, but targeting like our seniors, the library and schools. And they're also going to set aside $7,500 per year, or $15,000 out of the 2 for scholarships for low income and disabled to participate in their programs.
Okay, thank you.
Others?
Just a question on Levine. When you mentioned they're offering 11 programs, is that like 11 concerts?
It will be a mix. It's 11 per fiscal year, so I should say
Yeah.
right now it'll be 22 because we've combined 2. I'm actually sitting back down with the new library director and the new COO at school because all the staff I first started working with has changed, and we're going to revisit what those are because it needs to. They're open to doing what will work for us. So it could be concerts, it could be instrument zoo instead of petting zoo, but instruments and exploring. It could be some of the young children programs that we saw upstairs targeted for. And it also could be professional development for instructors, teachers at the school, or.
So these are 11 programs specifically targeted to the Falls Church community through library, schools, rec and parks?
100% of the programs will be in the city.
Great. And open to residents?
Correct.
For free? Okay.
Or the scholarships, it'll be a subsidy to the instructional programs. That may not be 100% free.
So the scholarships are different than the 11 programs?
Yeah,
or-
so it's
okay.
11 programs
Got
plus
it.
the scholarships.
Scholarships, other things. Okay, thank you.
Music therapists, we talked to them at the opening yesterday, which we have had off and on at the high school with some of our special needs kids. So I want to reiterate throwing that out there in your discussions when you're talking with him about that, because those are
Yeah, we have been
particularly
talking about
impactful
the Big
programs.
Buddies program and how it aligned very much with their therapeutic program.
Oh, cool.
They have them on staff, and they're really difficult to find for the school staff. So
Yeah.
that's another area that's a really good complementary
Yep.
school. And
Right. And I happen to know Jesse Thackeray was looking for another part-time music teacher. So that might also be an opportunity to connect those two organizations.
A lot of good opportunities for sure.
Erin?
So I understand this item, but in the staff report, it talks about, right, the kind of possibility of 5-year support, right? And so this is fiscal year 25 and 26. And so, I'm sorry if I missed this when you were explaining, like, when we did the criteria and had that process we went through with Holly of, like, you know, if you were based here, did you need to have the, you know, organization based here, like that whole conversation. So going forward, does Levine become part of the pool of applicants, for example, for grants in like fiscal year 27 or 28 or 29? Or are they sort of still considered a exempted program, for lack of like a better word, for our grants program that we consider separately, simply because of the sort of 5-year, you know, expectation of sorts or proposal of sorts that was built into the entitlement?
I would say it's probably both, for sure, with the up to 5 years, and we've been clear that that's based on council appropriation. That part's not guaranteed, but at this point, they would be standalone, because while 100% of their programs are within the city, not all of the criteria are met. We have had some preliminary internal staff conversations about whether we want to change it or not. There's pros and cons and implications, and so that would be a separate discussion in terms of whether the guidelines for the overall program would change. At this point, they would stand as a non-competitive, but still follow under the arts grants in reporting and reimbursement and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, I just asked because remember it had come up and there had been inquiries about sort of why certain programs are in or are not, and sort of separate budget allocations. And so I understand the explanation, but I just wanted to have a sense, like, going forward, were we in alignment, or are they still sort of parallel, like, application processes?
I would say the majority of all the goals and criteria align, but the 75% of their overall services
Yeah.
wouldn't fit in with the current.
Thank you.
Other questions about the grants? I had one. I thought, maybe I'm misremembering, but as part of the FY26 budget, we eliminated Watch Night? But we are putting money towards Watch Night?
The city component of Watch Night, yes, you defunded or didn't fund, but I believe the Watch Night nonprofit is still hoping, in terms of my communication with them, to still do some of their inside activities, because the city's part was more of outside, you know, closing the street and all the rides. So I know Mr. Thurston has been looking at, and you have details on their program, but they were looking at more of the inside.
Yes, so I know that Catch is still planning to do Watch Night. It's just going to be on a much smaller scale than it has been previously. So there will be no, I don't want to say there will be no city funds, because the GRC is recommending Catch receives $4,000 via the project grant. So those will be the only city funds allocated to Watch Night. It's not like in previous years where it was in the Recs and Parks budget to allocate a certain chunk of money for Watch Night under the events. But it's still happening, just on a much smaller scale.
But the expectation is we're not doing street closures and providing
Correct.
all the personnel for the large-scale version of it.
They'd be at the Falls Church and the Presbyterian, and I know it because just today we were working on whether the Victorians would be partnering at some of their activities that we do. So it'll be inside music and big band, much smaller scale, no road closure, or music in the street, or blow-up rides.
Great. Okay, thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
It's only 9:39. So we can hit schedule, I guess.
After Mary Beth, it's the middle of the night for Mary
I
Beth.
know. For Mary Beth's sake, we can go quickly, but I know that we've canceled the mayor's meeting on Wednesday because we have no council meeting on Monday, because we'll be at VMO, or some of us will be at VMO. So do we want to hit schedule? Okay. We'll do schedule and then council requests?
Yeah.
Okay. Does everyone have a copy of the schedule, or we'll pull it up? There it is.
And I don't know, do you want me to read through it? I don't think a whole lot has changed since the last time we reviewed it. We've been fairly consistent now on sort of the last several meetings of this term. So I could just, I'd be happy to walk through
Yeah.
if you'd like me to, but otherwise I can just field any questions or comments about that.
I was expecting hydrants tonight, but it didn't come up. The fire hydrant agreement was on last week's schedule.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, public safety asked for additional time on that, and I don't know the details.
Okay.
It was on the schedule, you're right.
But it's still on the schedule to be approved on the 27th, so I guess
So we would have one more work session between now and then, so,
we'll add it to the 20th then.
yeah, just as a consent preview.
Okay. One thing I'd asked for over email was an update, and this may be council request, because it was our June work session where we talked about signal timing. I don't know whether we are due for another one, because I think in that June meeting, we said we'd be 100% done with upgrading our signals this fall. So whether it's an email update or actual work session, but
We can
get a lot
probably
more.
add that to council requests. I know that DPW is still working on it, 'cause just some of the delay on the work of installing in the Kinley Horn optimization study. But we can include that in the request update.
So unlike the typical concerns we get where we field from residents, I'm starting to hear from people outside the city complain about our signal timing. So I figure that says something. If people
I
who,
feel like it's really off,
yeah.
driving up and down.
Actually, I meant to take a picture for you, Ms. Messer, but since we're talking about signals, Ms. Hiscock and I, where we live, we're usually going west on Route 7, and something is really off with the light at Clarendon's and Whole Foods, because people can't, like, if we're trying to go west, we can't, because people coming east trying to make a left onto Washington. There's something wrong with that timing of that signal. It's gotten worse over the last 2 weeks. I don't know what happened. Have you noticed that? Where and then you can't get through the intersection because people are blocking the box or whatever.
Yeah, we'll check on that one in particular, along with the email and the photos that the mayor sent today, and then the overall.
Oh, you do? Okay, good.
And the overall.
Yeah, staff are looking at that. There's also some work, there's some utility work that's happening up there that's also been impacting it. But we're aware of the concern, and
Okay, great.
we'll be making changes.
Great, thanks.
We don't need to schedule an update on that. Maybe just the council request.
Okay.
What timing?
This is Dave Snyder. A request about a presentation on managing the traffic up at the high school and middle school and safety issues and concerns.
So I can give council an update for tonight, and also commit to keeping the council and the community informed as we go forward. We have been fielding complaints about the flow to the secondary campus from Route 7 for vehicular traffic. And staff is also paying close attention to the route to school for walkers and students on bicycle. As we've done, is we're finally wrapping up the work on Haycock Road, just assessing kind of all the new facilities that are there and make sure they're functioning correctly, and that route stays and is safe for students. With respect to vehicular traffic accessing the campus from Route 7, our engineers have been up there to assess it. We did a walking tour with school staff and city staff together. One of the things, the thing that's changed this year relative to the past is that we now have a right turn lane into the campus. And so in the past, there's always been queuing to get into the campus, as we have about a 15-minute rush hour as parents are dropping students off. It used to be that queuing happened in the travel lane. And so if you were trying to leave the campus and take a right out, the queuing traffic sort of created a buffer for you and had a free lane for you to take a right out. Now that queuing is happening in the designated right turn lane. And so A, it creates a visibility obstruction, and B, there can be traffic speeding down the travel lane, whereas before they were blocked by the queued traffic. In addition, there's been a policy review on public safety. It was our practice that school resource officers were out in Route 7 doing traffic control. We do have concerns about the safety of having personnel out in the road, and it is also Fairfax County, and we would need a formal agreement with the county to be doing that. So we no longer have personnel out in the road, and so that is something we get asked a lot. Can't we just get someone there to block the traffic? And we're asking the community to be patient with us. We don't think that's a sustainable and really the best solution. What we're working for is to sort of increase the efficiency of traffic getting into the campus, and to the extent that there has to be queuing, to see if that can occur on school property as opposed to out in the right of way. And so we will have more to report on that. The strategies on that is some of the internal configuration of how vehicles move through that drop-off zone, and also encouraging alternative ways to get to the school buses and walking and biking, as well as using the drop-off, the designated drop-off circle that you can access off of the commons. That's something the schools asked for and negotiated as part of the West Falls development. And we think it's a little bit underused relative to the Route 7 access.
There's a great video. Just saying.
That's fine.
So more to come, but I do want the community to know that we're very committed to getting this right, and we're working very closely with the school staff. Anything in the right-of-way is general government responsibility, and so we take that responsibility very seriously. Flow of traffic internal to the site is school responsibility, and we're coordinating closely on both.
So can I ask a quick question though? And I've been away for 2 weeks, so maybe I missed it, but when is that traffic light gonna turn on there at Commons, West Falls Station Way and Chestnut?
So there is a date. It is, it's this week is when it will be operational. And then there's a 3-day period where it's getting the public used to the fact that it exists. And so it'll be kind of on flash and not operational. And then after that 3-day sort of burn-in period, it will be operational. So we believe by next week it should be operational.
And do we think that will help with that right-hand turn?
That will create a new
slow-
block and
Right.
a new gap in the traffic. So we think that will be part of the solution. That will help.
So, and, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So one of the comments and, many discussions over the past week is that, which I having talked about the CIP and buying school buses, was that there aren't enough school buses to transport everybody to school. That was one of the parents' comments, and I want to make sure that, if we're funding our public schools, everybody who's in the non-walking section should be able to ride on a school bus. I was surprised by that, and I think maybe there's,
Well, I can speak a little bit to that.
it's a school issue, but it's
yeah.
Also an issue for us to fund enough school
Right,
buses. That's our
right.
responsibility, is make sure we.
Right, and so Dr. Noonan and Chris and Michael, way back when, expanded the walking zone. And so I know that for years, for a couple years now, there's a group sort of, I want to say like, close kind of Oak Street, like off West, that area, like they got cut out of the bus. And so they have been complaining, and Mr. Gould just told me recently that the new superintendent actually went to that bus stop and walked to school with them to see what it was like to walk from there. So, so I think there are some parents who are not happy, like feel like they should, because especially with the construction and just traffic and all that, and the distance, that they should be able to take the bus.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's
it's
a
not-
bus, if they need more buses, or what that issue is, but.
So I had probably 4 parents write to me offline
Yeah.
about this, and they said that it was because the buses were crowded, that a lot of kids were 3 to a bus. So they were within the bus zone, but it was too crowded for them. 2, if they had sports equipment or band equipment, they weren't allowed on the bus. So I didn't know that was a rule. And so
That can't
parents
be
felt
true.
compelled to drive. Then, of course, there's always going to be the exceptions. People who have doctor's appointments, you're sick, you need to sleep in, whatever. So those are always the exceptions. But I thought the 3 to a row, plus if you have equipment, not being
I hope
allowed.
we're
was
not,
a new-
we don't, if you have equipment or music, I mean, that's 80% of our student body is
Yeah.
either a musician or a.
I didn't know it was a
athlete.
rule.
Yeah.
So it was noted, several parents too wrote to me about how because they were sports kids or band kids, they weren't allowed to take their equipment on the bus, or it was too crowded and they couldn't. So it sounds like there's barriers for why the bus does not work.
Unless it's like a double bass. Seems
Yeah.
like there should be
Yeah.
like
I
a
mean,
trumpet on the bus.
No, there are certain
Or
ones.
your,
Right.
lacrosse stick or whatever on the bus.
Yeah, it might be worth it to maybe on December 1st, as in the context of budget, we bring it up, and just say, because I know there is.
I mean, we don't want to tell the schools how to run their bus system, but.
No, but I'm saying, like, is this something that, just again, when I was in school board, and, this is something I've talked with when, we only, every year they try to purchase 2 new ones. We, instead of doing 2 electric, we did the diesel and the electric because it was a money thing. Like, had I known as school board chair, I could have like talked to you guys and maybe gotten a little bit money, and then we could have got, so I just wonder if we could talk with them and say, do you need some support? Is this a bus, like you don't have enough buses? I don't know. Might be a good conversation to have.
The other-
I know there are kids that sometimes kids are sitting on the floor, then they have to like pull the bus because there's nowhere to sit. So they are overcrowded. Yeah.
And then the other comments I got were that they were worried about the safety of walking and biking to school. So
Yeah.
they actually, one parent in particular cited the number of curb cuts on Route 7 and didn't feel comfortable with their middle schooler walking, which I'm like, that is a shared concern.
Yeah.
This is why we were looking at like an east-west connection, so that we
Right.
have a better pedestrian and bike experience.
That's right.
But those are the reasons why people drive their kids to school.
Right. And then along that same lines, I talked to Ms. Sherwood, and she was asking me, because a lot of this conversation lately has been focused on the Mustang Alley off Route 7, but her question was about the Haycock entrance. And, it actually has gotten a little better, but do we have any certain idea, like, when that will finally be all done in terms of, like, just having, crosswalks and everything? Are we still ways out from that?
So in the city limits, the crosswalks are going in now.
Okay.
And
Okay. Are they? I haven't been up that way. No.
we've been pressing HIT to, that median.
That's what I thought. I told her it was part fair, right? Because it's
Yeah,
sort
the
of,
line is right there at
that's what I
Mustang
thought.
Alley.
Okay.
And so the median coming down the hill from Fairfax County, there's been construction equipment stored there for way too long. And now HIT has sort of adopted that bad habit, and we need to stop that and have the median clear and clean so that it's good visibility. And then the fence at the corner is a visibility problem. We need to pull that fence back so that students waiting can be seen. We think that the additional signal there at Magnolia is going to be another option for students to cross there. We want that to be functioning well. We want all the sidewalks to be clear between there and Mustang Alley. So, you know, a lot of thought went into this. Haycock Road is not ideal, but the thought is it was going to be better when it's completed than it was before any of this construction happened
Right.
with the additional signals. And we want to make good on that promise. And so this is the sort of the final execution of that plan. And we need to get things a lot tidier and cleaner up there, mainly just because it's a visibility problem.
Right. And now as the sun is setting earlier, and, you know, and I'm thinking like kids who are done with, you know, play practice or football practice, and they're walking now, crossing at dusk when it's getting darker. What, do you remember what the lighting, I don't remember offhand if is there like a street light there? Is there any, do we have lighting issues there too, right?
I can't speak to exactly what the plan was. I hope there's really good lighting. I will,
Okay.
I will
But that's
check
part of,
that.
it's hopefully part of the
Yeah.
plan, okay.
Supposed to meet our streetscape standards, which has streetlights,
Yeah,
assuming
Okay.
they turn on.
That's right.
thank you.
That's part of a Dominion Power problem? No,
I don't know. Council requests?
Things. One, I got several complaints today. In my neighborhood, Dominion shut off power for 3 to 4 or more hours without alerting the neighborhood. And then also installed things in people's front yards without alerting them that that was happening. And so I'm wondering if there is some way to follow up with Dominion. Especially, Cindy, I don't know if that would be with you, but I can send you the address of the people who were concerned about why there were suddenly more wires hanging in their front yard. And what, I guess there's even more connections and other things. Like they already have 2 poles in their front yard, and now they have like more wires going across their front yard.
If you have addresses, please do send it. I'm aware of one, and we've already reached out to Dominion. They're private residential projects and ones that Dominion's doing, so we're finding out what the permit in the right-of-way.
Okay, yeah, because this was, there are no like projects going on the street. So this was just sort of,
It could be their infrastructure, but they need to do the notice, so yeah.
Yeah,
I have 607 Timber, I think is one address I have, if you have any others.
this is the 500 block of Greenwich.
Okay.
But also the fact that there was no notice given to the upgrades. And then the other thing I was wondering also regarding Dominion, is there an update on lighting on the WNOD trail?
The revised design is under final review with Dominion's transmission line group. And I know that our project manager reached out end of last week, and so we're waiting to hear back.
Okay, so hopefully soon.
We're, weekly working that one.
Great.
And I've escalated it to our contacts.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add that adds to the concern we heard several weeks ago from the resident on West Street about Dominion turning off power for many, many hours and parking and damaging cars. Like, do we need to escalate just what does Dominion have to do before they do this? Are they going to be in another neighborhood tomorrow and haven't told anyone?
Well, no, because they have to file a permit and notice of us if they're working in the right-of-way, so.
Right.
West Street I knew because of the windshield and the Timber Lane, and I'll check on Greenwich. But we've escalated that to our government relations.
But now it's a pattern. It's
Yes.
a one-off, but
They change subcontractors, and so we're working.
Council requests? Aaron?
I have one that I'll follow up on, and Ms. Downs and I were having an exchange over just the state of the light at Little Falls and Great Falls, and so because of
The one that's
crosswalk-
duct taped.
Yeah, duct taped together, and so our hope was, given that one of the caps is missing and that the rest of the light is duct taped together, that maybe if the light were actually getting replaced, our dream would be that there would be pedestrian signals there, which is its own infrastructure upgrade, but at a minimum, it would be nice to get the crosswalks back, and I know that they've been on the list, and then there were, it's delayed, and it's thermoplastic, and it's taking longer, but this weekend again with, the cleanup and the plein air festival and the farmer's market and people in and out of the community center. I had multiple residents, again, both neighbors and just community at large, saying what is going on with the Great Falls, Little Falls intersection. Like every weekend is sort of a demonstration of an ongoing issue that isn't being addressed. And then if you layer, back to school on top of it, it's a heavily used intersection with the connection, with W&OD at the bottom of the block too. And then just like the park users, like people do laps around, Cherry Hill Park. And so I've had a lot of inquiries about it.
Yeah, that's right. We did discuss it, but one of my concerns, and this has been a concern of mine for 10 years, I mean, since my kids, I don't understand why we don't have walk signals at that intersection, because lots of kids walk to the community center by themselves to go to rec basketball or what have you. And, cars do speed on Great Falls. And so God forbid some kid is, because there's no walk signals, isn't watching like what, and gets hit trying to cross Great Falls. So if we had, I don't know how to, work it in the budget and all that, but if we are redoing those lights anyway, because I know that they're all taped together right now, but I would love to see some crosswalks there. I mean, cross signals.
So here's actually the
Pedestrian signals, thank you, pedestrian signals.
the direction that we're going with this, and we're looking at is to go to a four-way stop. And so at Park Avenue in Little Falls, as part of the Great Streets program, get rid of that signal and go to a four-way stop. I think our engineers think that would be a better solution at Great Falls and Little Falls as well. A four-way stop. It would be then kind of mimicking the condition at Maple and Great Falls. And one of the problems on there is that that's a four-way stop, and it's the only one, I think, for miles of the road. And so if we establish a new pattern, we might get better compliance of the four-way stops.
You could do that. Everybody stop crossing.
Right.
Could be our
Scrambles.
Scramble.
So that's
Scramble.
under study right now, but that whole signal's on span wires hanging from power poles, and so to do it the way, and we're getting kicked off of all those poles, and so to fix it the right way, it's, these days an intersection is about $1 million by the time you do it, and so a much more cost-effective and maybe a better walkability solution is to go to a four-way stop.
Well, and I know, sorry, jumped in, but I also think that would slow down the traffic on Great Falls, because, they're, that classic, like, they
race to
see a
the
green
green.
light, we're gonna race through that green light, maybe that would be helpful to have, yeah, I think that would be, seems.
Free stops are better for pedestrians, assuming people don't run them.
But anyway, I don't want to lose with the signal that they're still missing crosswalks that we'll need regardless of whether it's a stop, a four-way stop, or a light.
That was
So
on council request.
your comment is about ped crossings and the
My,
center
it's like like the crosswalks
The
are
zebra
literally
crossings are-
non-existent anymore.
We were asked about them in June or July. It said it was supposed to be scheduled.
Yeah.
It was asked about again at office hours last week, so it's in the council request.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we have that. We're
Dave?
working on
Is that
DPW.
Little Fall, is that on our paving plan? I can't remember where it is on the
Yeah,
paving plan.
I would just add how complicated this discussion is, because there are multiple motor vehicle crashes every year at Maple and Great Falls. So, and that's a four-way stop, and the problem is we know all across the city, four-way stops are routinely ignored wherever they are. So, it's an interesting and complex problem.
Did you have something, Debbie?
I did. Well, the first question was, and I could go back and look on the list, but I had been asked about Little Falls, because we did do that trash pickup. So we were walking with a bunch of people, like, oh, this road's so bad. Why is it so bad right in front of City Hall, right in front of the rec center? I'm like, I think it's on the paving plan, but I actually don't know.
I'll +1 that one, because also, I thought it was getting repaved when the geothermal was done and the, driveway got repaved, but because of the heavy drill trucks and then the heavy trucks that were there, like taking away all the earth, and then needing to put the earth back in and, compact it all back down, the webbing and all the potholes sort of and the webbing and everything got way worse on the block, you know, between, yeah, like the City Hall entrance and Great Falls. And so it's also like one of these roadbed reconstruction concerns that like if we just leave it in the state it's in and the spider webbing gets worse and all the, you know, total disintegration of the road, especially that huge like rectangle that's now right at on Little Falls in the lane closest to like the community center driveway. It's just like it's not a like paved road there anymore.
Is it part of the Great Streets project for Park Avenue? No.
No, that's out of scope.
And just a quick note, Great Falls, I guess, does have a neighborhood traffic calming project in the works.
My one other question was another public comment we got about the scooter agreement. I know we had one, and then we let it lapse because we had not as much success, as I recall, as Arlington did, and we had a lot of Lime scooters that didn't get picked up and were.
We didn't have an agreement. We
didn't have
talked
an
about
agreement?
it, and then COVID happened, and we never had an agreement.
Okay, so we didn't have an agreement. Is that is anybody?
Apparently, the CACT talked about it, which is why it got picked up by All Now.
Okay.
Or ESC talked about it. Somebody talked about it. That was not us.
I've gotten a lot of correspondence as well on it because the ESC was talking about it. And I'll circle back with staff. It is kind of always sort of out there as sort of something that needs to be resolved. We kind of took it a long ways, but it never got fully across the line. My memory is that the council did adopt it, but it had it had so many rules associated with it, and fees were so high that the various different companies didn't want to.
Nobody submitted. That's what happened. It was right before the pandemic. We approved it
Nobody
like
bid.
that early in that winter, and then it was put out to bid, and nobody responded because they said, there was too many things. Yeah.
That's right. So I think the task would be is to kind of take that feedback, and if the council wanted to strip some of that out to make it more feasible, that would be the decision point.
This is Dave Steiner. I guess I don't object to discussing it some more, but recall that there was quite a discussion over what streets are appropriate for the scooters. And then the other issue was scooters running over people on sidewalks. And finally, where you park the scooters when they're not in use so that they don't end up everywhere. So there were a lot of issues that were carefully balanced in that it wasn't just a situation where we voted too much on and charged too much, but rather there was a lot of balancing. I'm not saying that we should be bound by what we did before, but we need to also take safety issues into consideration.
Agreed.
Okay, other council requests? I had a couple. So broadly, while we don't have a Monday meeting, could we go back through the old council requests that had open items and get updates? Because I'm starting to hear from people again because they never got answers the first time around from 2 months ago.
Certainly.
That would be wonderful. In particular, North Virginia and Great Falls has been asked about for several years, which I believe Public Works may be evaluating now. But it'd be nice to circle back with a date on when we might have a transportation engineer look at that other corner for the Williams.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. So you're talking about that work coming off of, because when I was door knocking though, a couple of neighbors said they'd love to see a three-way stop there. I don't know.
Yeah, we did
Yeah.
We did this.
But I mean, that's why that's why, I asked the mayor, I'm like, why do we not see so much speeding on Park? And it's because there's stop signs every single block. So, that was one of the thoughts is then you could also slow down the traffic before it gets to the bike path, So I don't know, just throw that out there.
Before it gets the other direction, it's a little fall.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Stop signs in every block. Chicken in every pot. Stop signs in every block.
Yeah. So speaking of stop signs, Park and Maple I know has been a sore spot because it's not a perfect T. There's really bad visibility, and it's actually kind of like a five-way stop because of that extra curb cut. so I've raised it in the past, whether we have the ability to close that extra curb cut to actually make it a proper four-way stop. We have engineering plans of what Great Streets is gonna do to that intersection to kind of better straighten it out. So given that Great Streets is several years out, can we at least take those engineering plans and do a rapid response and put flexi posts and paint to straighten that intersection up? Because pretty much like every 2 hours or so, there's like a near accident and people not seeing each other and running. Like,
Yeah, my end of 1 hour at the north side,
yeah. There's
the
honking,
patio out
there's
there,
screeching.
There were 1 hour, there were 4 different miscommunications on what was happening at that four-way stop, and I had never
It just
had
feels
that
like,
vantage point, the eagle eye.
yeah, it just feels like, given that we have engineering plans of how to fix that intersection, that feels like a good rapid response opportunity to like, can we just take the engineering plans and just flexi post and paint and address it for the next few years until we can get concrete out there, given that we know it's a hot spot. So, gonna ask about that one again. And I saw the good news about Annandale and Gundry getting solutions, so thank you for getting to that this fall. And the last one's more for council awareness, in case you get complaints about these, but there are these supposed e-bikes that are not e-bikes that we've got some teenagers riding around in. They're more like dirt bikes, so they go above the 20 miles an hour of e-bikes. So that I've gotten a number of complaints. They've been shared with the police. I think Chief Fard is asking his officers to enforce, because they may not be street legal, because they're not really e-bikes, they're really more dirt bikes, because the wattage or something exceeds what's allowed for bikes. But I think he's also in touch with school staff. So if you get complaints as well, just let the police know, because they are on top of enforcing that. And they're also just not, like, there's kids doing wheelies on Broad Street going like 30 miles an hour in them. So, yeah. That was it, though. It's more of awareness. Okay.
Plus one that if you do have information about those, if you'll let us know, we are following up on those.
But maybe also don't buy them for your kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it seems like fun, but I think statistically they are really dangerous. And so we're trying to prevent a potential bad situation.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Good night.